Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the weekly review on the 4th of August. I'm your host, Paul Hazard, and joining me this morning we have John Gibbs and Claire Cannon. You're very welcome. Now, for review this week, we have 3 stories in the news and 3 fantastic shows. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this message from our sponsor.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. John Catt have an exceptional collection of book titles that cover a range of educational topics, ideas and research. The books are aimed at forward-thinking schools and support best practice teaching for both primary and secondary education. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Welcome back. One of the stories in the news this week has been the rise in complaints about teachers. Now, this year, complaints have risen by 60%, which seems enormous. They've gone up from 1,038 last year to 1,684 this year. John, if I could come to you, is it too easy to complain about a teacher?
That's an interesting question. I think that's one of the first things that this sort of suggests. I mean, that was one of the lines that I saw in the way this was reported, was the simple idea that too many parents are able to complain too easily directly to the teaching regulators, teaching regulation agency. And well, that's part of the story. I think it probably is. I think it may well be that part of what we'll conclude is that there needs to be a bit of triage. A sense in which flippant complaints and vexatious complaints can be found out quickly or not go through to a full process of investigation where the wheels grind slowly. And then the other part of the story was that to be investigated for something as serious, and the teacher regulation agencies, violence against students, sexual misbehavior, drug abuse and so on, to be investigated for something of that kind and it taking years must be an absolutely awful and sort of terrifying experience for the teachers involved.
And I think there are reasons, but there seem to be 2 cases that have been strung out over 8 years, isn't it? I mean, that must be unacceptable.
It is completely baffling that it should take that long. I mean, it's not in the sense that you hear about the legal profession generally, a block of court cases, and this is a quasi-legal process, and it's sort of yet more examples of things not working as they should at the current time in our society. The other thing about it, though, one thing that did strike me, and I'll share a small anecdote, was that why is the 60% rise? I mean, okay, I get that it takes a long time. I get that it's gummed up. It must be awful for people. But why a 60% rise? Why is there suddenly an awful lot of people complaining? It can't just be because it's easier, although we are more aware these days and the processes and people have mobile phones that can connect with things really quickly and so on. It must be something else. And I thought years ago, I was on a gate duty at school. I was standing by the gate, very typical experience of a lot of teachers. I have to point people in reception. It was a big open sort of site. So if we had a visitor, they'd be pointed to reception. Students could be not allowed to escape and all those sort of things that you do during a mid-morning session. And there I was, and a parent turned up, absolutely boiling with anger. He swore at me, swore at any teacher who came into view, burst into the reception. We followed the guy. The police going to need to be called? He's really on the edge of lacking self-control, as it were, shouting at everyone. His daughter had been attacked in class. She was badly injured. The teachers were doing nothing. What were we doing? She'd messaged him. The daughter was produced. It'd been a misunderstanding. Her friend had stepped on her foot. It was now all forgiven. And she'd threatened to call her dad. And she had called her dad. Now, I thought at that moment he'd go something like, oh, silly me. Oh dear, I feel so embarrassed. He didn't. He left the school in as much anger as he arrived. Why are people so angry? And I think we are the front line of that mass of society that people feel is somehow against them, somehow misunderstanding them, somehow led them to this world in which so much happens they can't control. So there's a lot of anger out there, and I think it's part of the story.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that, yes. And people do seem to feel they have an automatic right to go to the very top, to have themselves listened to and heard without going through processes and steps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Claire, one of the things is that this system at the minute costs an awful lot of money. The Teacher Regulation Agency have had to spend an extra 4.9 million this year, and legal costs have gone up 70% to 7.2 million. That's a brand new school able to be built. Is this white elephant? Is it just a shocking waste of resources? Because an enormous number of complaints are rejected.
I think it is, a real consideration in terms of the funding. And when I was looking into this myself and sort of saw just how much was being, and it's not just the other school, it's all the other services. People are always talking about special needs, about the EHCP backlog. There's backlogs everywhere, as John said. There's a sort of, as a society, it does feel like we are stuck. But yeah, there's definitely something there around how these processes all work in the first place. And actually, when you touched on, why are people going straight to the top? Why are they not following the process? There's a massive thing there for me about why they're not following that process. Do they feel the process is effective? Should there be that process? If the process is prohibitive and they are just going straight to the top, do we actually look at having a different mechanism altogether? But also, going back to what John said, what actually is a complaint? Do they understand what should be a complaint? Because I think we live in a society where things are very binary or very polarized, particularly on social media. We've seen that, haven't we, with all the things going on up in Stockport and how that's had a massive ripple effect. And I think, your angry person on the gate, it's all or nothing. And it's very much, that's what's driving some of these, I've got to take it to the top. I've got to take it to the TRA. And then it does cost time and money, because we've got to kind of backtrack and investigate all that. And actually, if there was a piece of work around what actually should a complaint be about, and that's not to say we want to stop them, because I think it's really important there is an open line of communication. There are transparencies there that perhaps aren't at the moment, but that's got to come, for me, that's got to come from a place of understanding, and that will start to, over time, address the backlog, the funding, and all of those issues.
And we haven't really time to look at it today, but of course, there's a huge personal stress involved in teacher complaints and so on, which maybe brings us to our second story today. And it's getting a lot of coverage in the press and on social media this week, and that is teachers leaving the profession to pursue their side hustles. Claire, what are your thoughts on this?
I actually have to say, I'm not going to say what I did. That was me.
That was you?
that was me, assistant head teacher, and I had my other bit that I did as well. And much like the lady who's gone and done this sort of cat care thing, she'd started that, and then she kind of did that. She readdressed the balance by having it at the side, growing the business, and then it's taken over. And I, personally, I very much identify that. But I think actually it's a really nice thing, because you get, teaching is a very full-on profession. And I think for some people that's perhaps their release. That's something, resting doesn't have to be sitting on a chair doing nothing. It might be for some people, but actually doing something that you really enjoy and something that you really get a lot out of in a very different way to teaching. I I think that's really important for people's well-being, for people's mental health. And then surely then when they're going back into the classroom, that they do have that, they feel refreshed and they feel energized. So, I can see the points where some people have said, oh, well, why aren't you taking the time for yourself? But actually, I think they are. It's just about your mindset around what taking time for yourself looks like.
Yeah. John, now I think I know what you're going to say here, but I'm just going to be devil's advocate for a moment.
Go on.
You wouldn't want your brain surgeon to have a side hustle that's, cleaning out cat litter and things like that, for example. I mean, does it raise issues around teacher professionalism and so on, having a side hustle? Just forget for a moment that a lot of teachers are leaving the profession for it. Does having a side hustle raise professionalism issues?
Well, it used to be, for years, members of parliament used to have, it was accepted they would have jobs, and increasingly that's not the case. They would have to keep their profession going. And the argument was always, well, it keeps them in touch and grounded with the real world and so on. And it's possible, I would have said, Paul, I agree with you there. You shouldn't, teaching is professional. This is big enough. And how anyone manages to have a side hustle, I don't know, given teaching and so on. But what Claire said has made me rethink that, because, having something that takes you away from the stresses of teaching. When I look back at my teaching career, it was all sort of encompassing. And I used to, after people would say to me, stop being a teacher when you're at the weekend trying to explain something to someone in a very teacherly way, or say, well, there were 3 points to this. You say, stop being a teacher. Get out of that habit of being a teacher the whole time.
We all lost a lot of friends doing that, didn't we?
Oh, absolutely. I'll just write that on a whiteboard, shall I? Goodness me. So be escaping teaching. And if you wished to, the other thing about that, of course, is if you want to create silence in a staff room, go into the staff room, then in an ordinary voice, say to someone, well, I've just discovered a very good way of earning money just as much as being a teacher and get not teaching. And you're the silence as everyone listens in on what you're saying.
Yeah.
There is a sense in which people would like something beyond teaching. So I'm not averse to the idea. I think if it works, do it. Yeah. If it helps survival, by all means. And people used to say to me, teaching's great because you could easily leave teaching, John, because you have lots of transferable skills. We're articulate, we're quite clever, we're good at organizing things, we're multitaskers and so on. And I think it's harder in some ways to get up to not teach, because it's a very specific sorts of thing. So finding something on the side must be a great sense of having a rounder life.
Mm-hmm. And Claire, if we could finish just on this. You've done this, you've pursued your side hustle, it's successful. Would you advise others to? Is it too risky? Is it an antidote to stress even?
For me, yes, it absolutely was that sort of, I wouldn't say antidote to stress, but it was definitely gave me a different outlet and a different focus. And, I think if it was someone's hobby, if they said I went and volunteered at a animal rescue shelter at a weekend, no one would bat an eyelid. Because it's paid, somehow it causes a different reaction. Mm-hmm. No, I think, and the thing about risk is I think absolutely not, because you've still got your teaching salary, you've still got that job security, and it's, in essence, it's sort of the least, I'm not the person who's going to take the biggest risks in life, but it's almost like the least risk averse way of seeing if you can make a go of something else. And if it works great. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. Hopefully you've had a good time doing it.
Great, yeah. On to our third story today, which again carries significant link, and that is teacher mums leaving the profession. Now, Think Tank, the New British Project, and MTPT Project have drawn up a set of proposals to stem the hemorrhaging of women in their 30s leaving teaching. Claire, if we could come to you first on this, what's happening in teaching that talented women, experienced teachers who of course are the future leaders in the profession, are feeling just disenfranchised and just leave? What's happening?
That's a massive question, and I think we need several shows to really get into that. I mean, on the face of it, you hear the talk about workload, you hear the talk about behavior concerns, you know, the amount of different priorities people are managing. I think you've also got the fact that people of that age, you know, statistically are, you know, they are more likely to be parents. There's a lot of demands on you when you are a mum of young children, obviously as they grow up as well, but particularly when they're young, and they really do need you. But I think we've got a real dichotomy between workplace narrative around let's look after our staff, let's think about well-being, but at the same time people finding it really hard to do things like go to their children's play, get to sports days. I heard of one case where a parent was told they couldn't go to their own child's parents' evening because it was their school's parents' evening. And those are the things that make it really difficult. But I did start also thinking more broadly, you know, outside of education, what is going on? Because recruitment and retention of staff is bigger than just education. And came across something called the 10-year itch, which is essentially people, you know, they get 10 years into a career and then they think, actually, I might want to do something different. And if you think about people in their 30s, if they graduated in their sort of, you know, 22, 23-ish, perhaps if they were NQTs then, ECTs now, you know, you add 10 years to that, it also hits the time when they are likely to become parents. So have you also got that kind of double whammy going on of it's also a time in people's lives when they think, I've got long enough left of my career that I could change and make a go of something new. And I've got the parent thing. And obviously now you've got people seeing other sectors having a lot more, you know, easy access to flexible working. And I think it's really lovely to see that there are schools talking about 9-day fortnights, that, you know, PPA can obviously now be taken from home. But it's making sure that whatever changes are happening are actually equitable. And I, you know, again, sort of looking at things online, there was quite a few posts on LinkedIn this week where people were saying, you know, parental leave, maternity leave, paternity leave, they're not equal amongst the education sector compared to other sectors. And how can you start to, it's not about being the same, but how can you make it work in a way that obviously works for the students in our schools, but also for the staff, the adults themselves as well. So I think there's a very, you know, very big picture there. And like I say, be a very long show if we really unpicked it all.
I think the headline really targeted mums, and I think that was maybe to get a little bit of readership, but I think it is, you know, it is broader. It's women aged 30 to 39. But John, Claire raises a very interesting point there. Is maternity leave a factor? Like, teachers are entitled to 4 weeks full paid maternity leave. Interestingly, if you work for the Department of Education, you're entitled to 28 weeks. And if you work for Lidl, you're also entitled to 28 weeks. Surely that can't be right. Teachers have to be treated much more humanely than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that at least one of the issues this raises, this story, is why should it be such a choice? You know, that you can't, it's very difficult to be a parent. You know, it's hard work. And if you have to feel that the choice is struggling with maintaining a full-time job, going back to work much earlier than you wanted to, or giving up completely, there shouldn't be such a cliff edge. Clearly, as Claire says, you know, there's all sorts of imaginative ways you can keep people in teaching if they wish to teach part-time, teach flexibly, teach for reduced hours, have job shares, all the things that these days, it's a funny old conversation to be having, isn't it? That women should have to choose. You know, I know 2 generations ago, women were routinely fired as soon as they became mothers, or in fact got married. Back in the 1930s, they would be fired if they got married and so on. It was a sort of idea that somehow you should be, you know, that isn't there now. That isn't the reason for this. It's because we somehow imagine teachers will just muddle along with this. On the other hand, If someone says, look, I'm going to be a parent and I want to stop teaching, yeah, that's fine. Do that. You know, it's a perfectly good decision to make. Kids grow up really quickly. You're taking them off to school, and the next thing you know, they're graduation at university. Where did the years go? Enjoy their childhood if that's what you wish to do as well. So it's no problem. You know, we are losing teachers. In the bigger picture, we lose teachers faster than you can replace them in some. I'm not sure the exact statistics there.
Yeah.
But there are all sorts of reasons why people leave teaching: stress, workload, and this is one of them. It's not as flexible enough profession as it should be, and we need to seriously look at that in ways other than pay, keeping teachers in the profession and attracting people to the profession.
Mm-hmm. And Claire, just to finish on this topic, teaching is 76% of teachers are women, and in primary school that goes up to 85%. Is the profession loaded against women?
I think in some ways, yes, and particularly when you said, you know, as John highlighted the, you know, that and the hours, and as you said, you know, working in Lidl, there are those things to factor in. But I think also it's, you know, you hear about compassion fatigue. You know, again, a bit of a sweeping statement, but it is predominantly mums that are going home, doing a lot of childcare, doing a lot of, you know, all of those things. And obviously not to say that dads aren't doing that. Of course they are. But there are still, you know, that is still a role that is taken on by women. And yes, I think, you know, there's very little break. I actually saw something about people, it was on Hannah's show, which I was going to come to in a minute, but talking about, you know, we have to work 11 out of 10. And that's, you know, that's seen as the norm. That's seen what you have to do. That's not sustainable for anybody in their work life. It's certainly not sustainable if you're going home and having to do the same as a mum. So yes, I do think there are things that are stacked up to an extent against women. And, you know, I've seen in people talking about in the comments about the appraisal system. You know, when you go back, you've had a gap. You haven't completed your year's, you know, performance targets because you were off. Well, of course you weren't. Have they been reflected to adapt that? If they haven't, again, that's something. It's another barrier in the way. So there's lots more to be done. It's not all doom and gloom. But yeah, there are definitely things that are at the moment still blockers in the way of women's progress.
Can
John,
I just
comment? Yeah.
Can I just underline what you just said, or what you just said, Claire, is that, you know, not only is it an overwhelmingly female profession, but it's an overwhelmingly male-dominated management. I mean, the head teachers are disproportionately male. And this is part of the, this is, as Claire said, this is part of what happens, you know, in this profession and others. Women take chunks of their professional career out at that particular time when often your career jumps, you know, when you've laid the foundations and you're now going to go into management. That's when you're at home, or that's when you're taking part-time, or that's when you're job sharing. And that's another issue as well.
I'm sure we'll return to all three of our stories this morning, but let's have a word from our sponsor before we look at our shows of the week.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. John Catt have an exceptional collection of book titles that cover a range of educational topics, ideas and research. The books are aimed at forward-thinking schools and support best practice teaching for both primary and secondary education. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Welcome back, everybody. John, what shows have caught your eye this week?
Well, Paul, as you know, a couple of shows caught my eye. One, because I got my Sundays mixed up. And by the way, you know, the back catalogue our teachers talk radio shows go back for years, and you can find some amazing shows that are there in the archive dealing with all sorts of things as well.
Free
So I was initially
CPD.
going to recommend 2 Sundays ago a show that Paul, you had recommended last week on I think it was Amanda's show, Staying in the Classroom as opposed to Pursuing Management. So, brilliant show. So that aside, this week's show in the last couple of days, last Wednesday, the Late Show was Sophie Smith-Tong's show with her guest Sarah De Silva, and their show was titled, this is what caught me, Nurturing Belonging and Self-Expression. And they both described how some of the dilemmas of trying to create a nurturing, self-expressive classroom, with some of the difficulties with that. If you wish to be a real human being in the classroom and bring your own life experiences in front of children, and that yet also maintain a distance and being professional. And also it's very idealist. They admitted it was an idealistic kind of view, but not one that we should forget. I think that the phrase nurture, belonging and self-expression should be the strapline of all schools. Get rid of all those silly straplines about upwards and onwards and Excelsior and be successful and so on. Just have those. If we said, what is teaching for? What are schools for? Nurture, belonging and self-expression. It came through in that show brilliantly.
Yeah, good. Well, John, I listened to your show. I absolutely loved it. And you had Hannah Robinson on at the start, a maths teacher, and I began to worry. But I quickly realized you were talking about humor. And interestingly, humor is one way of getting to that human aspect of a school and relating. It's a very, very little explored area of what we do as teachers. And yet we all use humor every day, and we use it for a range of purposes. And I was so delighted that you and Hannah covered every single purpose possible, from, taking the tension out of issues, creating relationship, just modeling what it is to be a person. And I love that whole, just the teacher being humor, no matter how bad his dad jokes are, just being able to model being a pupil is great for children. It gives that approval that it's okay to express your humor. Super show. Everybody should listen to it, I think. Sarah, what about you? What have you been listening to this week?
I don't know, call it serendipity or something. I managed to choose a show sort of before we'd finalised what we were going to talk about in the main part of this, which is Hannah's show on balancing work and family life. And, there was bits in there about people feeling guilty when they don't prioritise their own family because they prioritise everyone else's, other people's children. Talking about the workload, about trying to set boundaries, and that could be really quite hard sometimes because, you say, right, I'm going to send these emails, I'm going to spend an hour after work, and then actually something happens in your day that you end up dealing with that first, and then it becomes an hour and a half after work, or it becomes the hour after work plus half an hour in the evening when actually what you wanted to do was go for a run or spend some time with your kids, whatever. So, there were some really interesting bits in there that I think really relatable to lots of people. But what I really liked was, Hannah was talking to her sister, and they're talking about this book, about 4,000 weeks. So we live on average for 4,000 weeks, which I don't know whether that sounds a lot or not a lot, actually. I think it depends when I think about it. But, they was in a lifetime.
Paul and I are coming under a bit of pressure here.
But yeah, I just, they were saying in a lifetime, we block away, don't we, 6 weeks to go on holiday, or, in 2 years, I want to be ahead of you, or whatever it is you want to do. But actually breaking that down a little bit more and saying, right, what am I going to do in the next hour? Being a bit more certain with our boundaries. And I just really liked how, she then broke that down again into things like scheduling emails, not responding at certain times, which are all things we talk about, but do we actually do? It was just full of sort of practical tips, and I just really liked, how relatable it was, and say that a bit of a different take on it with the 4,000 weeks. So yeah, really enjoyed listening to that. And again, I think, it would be well worth a listen for other people too.
Good, thank you. Well, that's it. We're at the end of yet another show. Thank you very much to our sponsors, John Catt, and don't forget to use the code JCTTR2425 and you can get a discount. Many thanks to the panelists this week, Claire Cannon and John Gibbs, and don't forget the background team. As you heard Claire saying about Hannah's show, teaching is difficult, it's tough, we pay a price for it. So enjoy your well-earned and well-deserved summer break. See you next week, everybody. Bye.